girls would order pizza as part of their weekend dinner plans. My favorite house that I delivered to was this really sweet older couple. I'll call them Doris and Henry. Those aren't their real names, but they were probably in their mid-70s or so. They ordered a medium pizza, breadsticks, salad, and then a bottle of Coke every single Friday night. The only time that they didn't order was like right before Christmas or on holidays, etc. etc. I need to work on that. Doris would bake Christmas cookies every year. I only did this job for 3 years, but she would actually give me a huge tin of the homemade sugar cookies for those 3 years in a row, along with a card. Pretty cool. Not many people give their delivery drivers cookies and Christmas cards. Very sweet. The last year that I worked for the restaurant, I delivered to them at the end of June. I dropped the pizza off, and we chatted for just a couple of minutes as we always did. They were heading out of the city to visit their daughter for a little beachside early summer vacation. I wished them a great vacation, a safe flight, and told them that I would see them 2 weeks later when they got back. I even joked with them not to cheat on the restaurant by getting pizza in another city. So, the weekend goes by as normal. I worked on Monday night, as I always did, and then I had classes the rest of the week. The weekend rolls around again, and on Friday night, I am super busy delivering food. Near closing time, I get a delivery notice for Doris and Henry's house. First thing I noticed was that it was much later than they normally ordered. Plus, and not a crime, but it was just something that stood out, they weren't supposed to be back yet from vacation. And they had changed their order to something completely different. No pizza. Instead, it was a large but single serving of lasagna. Oh. My heart immediately sank, and I thought the worst. Had one of them passed away while on vacation? That might explain why the single order of food and why they had come home early. Oh no. But then I thought, well, if one of them had passed, wouldn't they have likely stayed with their daughter to plan the funeral and to just be around family? I packed the order into my car and I drove to their townhouse. I knocked, and when a young man answered the door, I didn't really know what to say. He was casual, took the food, paid in cash with a good tip, then he went to close the door. I instantly got a weird vibe from him. Not necessarily information. Since psychology is the field that I did end up going into, I like to think that even before my accumulated experience of working with people, I have always been good with them. I knew as soon as he opened the door, something was off. But obviously, the lie that he had just told me everything that I needed to know. This was before cell phones, so I calmly got back in my car. I drove to the police station and I explained to them what had just happened. I told them that I didn't have any solid proof or anything, but the couple that I delivered to were not supposed to be there, and I was pretty certain that something fishy was going on. Yeah. Luckily, Henry had been an active volunteer in the city before retiring, so the police not only had his full name, but they also had his daughter's contact information, who was one of his emergency contacts. They called her, got a hold of Doris and Henry, and just as I had suspected, there should not have been anybody in their home at that moment. With permission, police went there, opened the door, and found the guy who had broken in through an upstairs window, and he was making himself nice and comfortable. I like to imagine that he was just sitting down in the TV room, just about ready to dig into the lasagna when police interrupted him. He was some sort of squatter, but nobody knew how he had known that Doris and Henry would be gone for 2 weeks. The information must have just gotten passed around to neighbors in the townhouse lot and somehow reached the wrong person. Or maybe he had been watching. I have no idea, but I am really glad that he was not there when they got home. Thanks for reading. Moral of the story, I guess, is to always trust your gut. Take care, Tim. That's really scary. Thank you so much for sending that, Tim, for sharing that with us. Yeah, that's really scary to think about, because I'm not saying it was like any less dangerous or anything, but being a young 19-year-old guy versus an elderly couple coming home and maybe not expecting some possibly dangerous person squatting in their home, I'd say you're a hero for solving that and getting the guy out. Very, very scary. Yeah, good for you for trusting your gut. Okay. I switched back to a different honey, which is I can't remember the name, but it's like a Canadian you got down there because you needed a key to open the door, and the owner was the only one there. My brother explained that George let him in and took him down to the basement. The owner went pale. To that he replied, quote, "George has been dead for years," unquote. From M. That is beyond creepy. I believe in ghosts as much as the next person, but there is something like not sinister, but there is something very overtly creepy about a ghost being able to like manipulate physical things. I don't like that. And just a quick little side note, unless you say, like specifically say your name in the actual email, I won't read your name out loud because I'm just I want to be very respectful and careful with people's privacy. So unless you actually say your name, like, "Hi, my name is blank," or "Thanks for reading from blank," I won't actually say the name that appears in your email address. Just if you're wondering. Okay. So I sent a story last night about something that my brother experienced, but I'll let you decide if this one is more share-worthy. Right. I was searching my memory for an experience that I cannot explain, and I thought I didn't have any. Until I remembered this. If it wasn't for my mom and brother remembering this occurrence, I would have thought that it was a dream. This happened when I was between functioning, but it rang a second time, meaning that someone was pressing it. That's always creepy in the middle of the night. My dad cautiously peered out the top window of our front door, and he saw a man standing on our front porch. "What do you want?" he asked. And the man replied, quote, "Can I sit on your front porch?" Unquote. The man asked it in an uneven and confused tone. My dad replied, quote, "No, get off my porch or I'll call the police," unquote. And he turned off our front light. A couple of minutes later, we looked out our side window and we saw the man standing under a streetlight with a bicycle, looking around and seemingly lost. Eventually, he moved on. About 2 miles from our house was a group home for people with developmental delays, and my parents theorized that the man was likely a resident who had left in the middle of the night and gotten lost. A lot of people mistook our dead-end street for a through street, and it was easy to lose your sense of direction, especially in the dark. It was likely that the man meant no harm and was disoriented, but it was still unnerving for someone to ring your doorbell in the middle of the night. My parents always lock the doors for a reason, even in a small town. If he was from the group home, then that's really sad. Really hope he was able to find his way back. But still, it doesn't take away from how scary that is. Having someone knock on your door at a weird hour is very, very spooky. Yeah, I don't like that at all. The second story happened several years later when I was in high school. Our house didn't have central AC, so at night we would open our windows to let cool air come in through the screens. This was upstate New York, so summer nights would be nice and cool. One night we heard someone or something shrieking out in the night. It stopped after a few minutes, and my parents dismissed it as an animal. It still freaked me out, so my brother and I did some research, and we found that foxes can let out screams during the night when mating or communicating. Our cul-de-sac was surrounded by woods, so it wouldn't be unusual for a fox to be around. The weird thing is, we had lived on the street for 10 years at that point, for me. It's very, very creepy. If you've never heard it, go look it up. Okay. Alright. I suppose that this isn't supernaturally creepy, but I was working on a bid to demolish an old hospital that was basically additions on additions on additions. I got separated from the rest of the group on the job walk, and I got myself totally lost in this giant empty hospital. I eventually stumbled upon the autopsy room. Creepiest vibes. Metal table in the middle of the room, a drain on the damp floor, minimal lighting, spooky AF. I work on historic properties. Been conserving, restoring history for 30 plus years. Lots of weird shit over the years. I was working on an old heritage property in the middle of England. It was 2018. We were in the middle of a heat wave, but mild breeze. And it was around 8:30 a.m. I'd cleared the property with the custodian, and he had assured me that it was closed to the public for the next 5 days, and he headed off. I was the only one on site. I was waiting for my guys to arrive, so I just set up the work area. Just finished setting up all my tools in the cellar to get to work on replacing a 500-year-old oak beam that was sagging. I heard a door slam. The stereotypical creak and slam latch clunk of a horror movie door. So I shouted up. No answer. Then I went up in case someone had turned up and maybe gone the wrong way. No one was around, except a door was shut. It had a latch that it clipped onto the wall with, so I assumed that it was the wind. I re-clipped it and I walked back towards the cellar, and I heard footsteps above me. So at this point, I called the custodian thinking that maybe he had come back. He was at home. So I walk up the stairs into the loft, and there is no one up there. It's basically just an open floor upstairs with 3 gambrel bents in a line. Completely open, no rooms, nowhere for anyone to be hiding. I say to myself, alright, I lost my entire flask, but the lid... What? I lost my entire flask, but the lid with half a cup of tea was still down in the cellar. And my right-hand man's phone fell face down off a table while we were eating lunch. It just straight up fell off. Sounds like a poltergeist. Ghost stories sound so unbelievable, even though I want to believe them so badly, and I generally do. But then I always think about how, like, I have close people in my life who are very close to me, I'm very close to them, and they have seen stuff, and there's never any reason for them to lie. And I believe them, and it's stories like that that make me believe in ghosts. So let us continue. I was working in the workshop. I had music on and someone tapped me on the shoulder. Except it was 11:30 p.m. and I was all alone with the dog. The dog got up, walked around the bench, and started wagging her tail, and then rolled over onto her back. Like she wanted belly scratches. I just like to think that my grandfather, I'm a 6th generation carpenter, came to shoot the shit in the shop. I like that one. We always need a couple, like, brighter ones. I always love when, like, dogs get involved too. I subcontracted for a company that flipped houses, and they bought this house from the 1950s. The house gave me weird vibes from the second that I walked in. Really, it was kind of dark and dingy. I walked around and went into the basement. Each room in the basement had a padded lock, and in each room it was full of weird shit. A house from the 1950s with a bunch of rooms with padlocks. That's weird. A couple weeks into it, I was working and I was alone in the basement, and I kid you not, I heard someone laughing and running around upstairs. I ran upstairs and no one was to be found, and all of the doors were locked, and it absolutely tripped me out. In a home. I guess maybe it wasn't a home at one time, but still weird. I oversaw the demo phase often when serving as a junior PM for ACM in New York City. One of those, you did it pretty well once, now you're the guy. just a warehouse that had been converted to a soundstage and some offices. Abatement crews had finished the hot work, so I was doing the walkthrough after hours to make sure that everything checked out and the ID hotspots had all been cleared. I found a door that did not show up on any plans of the site and had been exposed when the crews were clearing tar from the interior walls. I figure, F it, I might as well see what's inside. So I pop on my flashlight and I open the door. Entire room is painted red. There's moldy and stained red carpeting, and the windows have been bricked over from the inside. This is as hidden of a room as you get. There's 2 filing cabinets and a tattered couch along one wall, and the filing cabinets were full of little dossiers on people. I have no idea why that room was bricked up from both the outside and the inside, then not listed on any plans. But that place was 100,000% bad vibes. The dossier had a few names, a few dates, and corresponding photos, but the content did not seem like a list of films that people had been in, so they didn't seem like resumes for a movie or something. That's creepy. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe. I don't know. I find hidden rooms so interesting. It's like recurring dream that I always have where I've moved into a new house and then I always end up finding hidden rooms. I don't know why. I dream that all the time. I don't know. Maybe I'm weird. Right. So, there was a historic house that my dad was painting. He would check that the double-hung windows were unlocked so that he could slide them open from the outside of the scaffold as he got to them to paint the jam. Then he would climb out on the scaffolding and discover that several of the windows had re-locked themselves. Another window he had absolutely no issue opening, but the owners of the house said that they had never been able to open it. He also heard someone walking in the house when nobody was there. He mentioned it to the owner, and they said that they heard the footsteps regularly as well, including one time that the husband and wife both thought that they heard their daughter, who was the only other person in the house, and who was supposed to be doing her homework. She apparently came down the stairs and he showed it to the current and the former owners of the house, and nobody knows who the woman in the picture is. The owner of the house is a major client, and he has done a lot of work on the home. A complete remodel of just about every room, and that was the only spooky thing that happened. Alright, I was working in a college dorm at an art school, and I was up on a ladder patching a ceiling. I had my drill index open like a book on the counter in the kitchen. I'm focused on my work as I noticed something in my peripheral move. And it's the index that just slides off of the counter and onto the floor. There was no reason for it. The counter wasn't wet and it was level. So one of the guys that lives there walks into the kitchen. I say, I don't want to sound silly, but is this place haunted? And all nonchalant, he's like, oh yeah, scuff, stuff happens all the time. There's even a pentagram painted on the floor in the basement. I'm not an expert, but that can't be good. I went to that job late and I stayed late because at that time there were a lot of people in the dorm. Oh, that scared me pretty good. Alright, a house that I worked on was built by the old man in the 70s, and it's adjacent to a cemetery where he was later buried. His wife, the owner, and her daughter lived there, and the old lady said that he always visited now and again, and always warned her about things like if she left the oven on. He would warn her if she left the oven on, he would bang on the wall in the kitchen to draw her attention. We joked that she must be lonely and making things up, since her daughter was at college most of the time, most of the year. We never worked there overnight, but one time I was there alone since the 3 other guys had to go back to the shop, and it felt eerie as F. I couldn't say anything about it to the crew because I knew that I would get laughed at, so I just kept it to myself. At our next site, the carpenter that I was working for asked me if that house felt weird, and he said that he felt the air grow cold and heavy when he was alone there. I was working in the Denver Athletic Club, which is basically a fancy sports recreation center for Denver's rich people. Building is from the could not find logical answers or explanations to any of it. I got told about a sanatorium being demolished by the local council. They told us that we could reclaim anything that we wanted before the dozers went in. I had a really, really, really uneasy feeling in one or two of the operating rooms and corridors. We cleared all the floorboards, the rafters and joists. So just a little trigger warning. This is clearly they found stuff related to conversion therapy. So maybe skip this story if you don't want to hear it. But they found hand-scribbled notes in the floors, which talked about being drugged and subjected to therapy to cure them of being gay. Later found out that the whole ward was home to a doctor who was referred to as the Butcher. He performed lobotomies on patients accused of being gay. I started my career in 18th century restoration, and I worked on a lot of old houses. I continued to work in old houses from 1800s here and there in southeast Connecticut. Unfortunately, no ghosts. I get jealous when other people who don't regularly work in old houses claim to experience weird shit the one time that they show up. Yeah, me too. I want to experience something, so I understand. Okay, so this is the Highgate Vampire. The cemetery in its original form, the northwestern wooded area, opened in 1839 as part of a plan to provide 7 large, modern cemeteries, now known as the Magnificent Seven, around the outside of central London. The inner city cemeteries, mostly the graveyards attached to individual churches, had long been unable to cope with the number of burials and were seen as a hazard to health and an undignified way to treat the dead. This particular cemetery began to capture the public's eye when people began reporting of strange occurrences and seeing ghouls and ghosts while walking through the cemetery. But one particular story is unlike reports were from people who claimed to have been confronted by this apparition, which invariably took the form of a tall, dark figure and petrified people both in or passing by the cemetery. Where possible, most of these reports were followed up, but unfortunately, many turned out to be vague repetition of local gossip or the result of unqualified rumors. Eventually, a man was traced who claimed to have had a first-hand encounter with this phenomenon, although he requested that his name be withheld to avoid his account from being subjected to ridicule. According to this person, referred to as Thornton, he had been hypnotized by something in the cemetery after he had gone there late one afternoon to look around. As the light began to fail, he decided to leave, but somehow he ended up becoming hopelessly lost. Not being a superstitious person or even believing in the existence of ghosts, he walked calmly around looking for the gate when he suddenly became aware of the presence of something behind him. Swinging around less than 6 feet away, he saw a tall, dark specter hovering just above the ground. He found himself transfixed to the spot, unable to move, drained of energy by some powerful hypnotic force that in a matter of seconds rendered him unconscious. So great was the intensity of this force that he remained like this for several minutes, or so it seemed, before the specter abruptly vanished and he slowly regained his normal faculties. Recalling the incident afterwards, he said that it was almost as if some force of terribly evil proportions had actually sought him out with the intention of doing serious harm. All I can picture in my head right now is Salem's Lot, which I read recently. It's given off very Salem's Lot vibes. This account was intriguing. Thornton was a sincere and logical person, and he was not the type liable to fantasy or exaggeration. His profession as an accountant by itself suggested that his interest lay in things of a logical nature. That he had seen something there seemed a little doubt. But what was especially interesting was that he had described the entity as seeking him out and actually trying to cause physical harm. An uncommon occurrence with reports of ghostly confrontations, when ghosts themselves are rarely reported as exercising any was one old lady who claimed that she had been frightened by a tall, dark man who floated at her from within the cemetery gates. She had been walking her dog late one night, but as she approached the gates of the cemetery, it started to howl and tried to retreat. She looked up and she saw a figure with glaring eyes staring at her. And in a matter of seconds, it promptly vanished. This account was also entered on the Society's files, but it seemed that the next step to obtaining more precise information was to visit Highgate Cemetery in daylight to check the sites of the phenomenon's reputed appearances and perhaps discover some clues that could have otherwise accounted for its presence. This visit was made by the author, who had taken a personal interest in the case, although it turned out to be disappointing as nothing significant was found. By way of a hoax, or otherwise, for both sightings. I arrived at the cemetery in the morning, and I spent several hours there. It was the first time I had been there for over 2 years, and the increase in vandalism was immediately apparent. Vaults had been broken into, and coffins were quite literally smashed apart. That's so bad. One vault near the top gate was wide open, and one could see the remains of a skeleton where it had been wrenched from its coffin. Another vault on the main pathway had been entered, and one of the coffins inside was set alight. Although this vault had been padlocked and chained, the door was made up of an iron grill, and the vandalized coffin was available for all to see. Furthermore, it appeared that virtually no attempt had been made to repair any of the damage. All this, however, came no nearer to solving the mystery of the black apparition. Indeed, apart from rumor and other unsubstantiated local stories, the only real evidence were the testimonies of just 2 people, and it seemed the only way to credit their accounts and thereby justify a full investigation was to spend a night in the cemetery to see if the phenomenon could be witnessed. The place where Thornton had been confronted inside the cemetery seemed an appropriate place, as it was secluded and there was no risk of being seen by anybody, happening by the top gate. This was the place where the old lady had seen the entity. The date chosen was December 21st, the eve of the winter solstice, and a traditional time when potent psychic forces have easy access to the earthly plane. That the entity may be dangerous from a psychic point of view was a fact not overlooked. But I was confident that previous experiences with potentially malevolent forces would enable me to deal with any such possibility. Okay. Around 11 p.m. on the proposed night, I set off for the cemetery. It was a bitterly cold night, and the surrounding area was deserted. of some alien presence. This was difficult to define, except insofar as there was a distinct impression of no longer being alone. Reaching the top gate and preparing to scale this, I decided to wait a couple of minutes with the intention of perhaps noticing some material object through the gate, such as a shadow cast by a tombstone or from a tree moving in the wind, that could have otherwise accounted for the old lady's phantom. Peering through the rusty bars of the gate, scrutinizing the darkness, objects near the gate itself lining the pathway were fairly easy to discern. But after 20 yards or so, the path disappeared into impenetrable blackness. Staring into this, perhaps due to some trick of the light, there was a distinct impression of something moving. What appeared one minute to be a definite black shape or shadow would suddenly alter its form or change intensity. The